So, thank you so much, Mu Sochua, for joining us here and sitting down to talk with us. Um, this, your visit to Montreal, you're here to mark the 30-year anniversary of the Paris Peace Accords, and in sort of in line with that, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, broadly about how governance, human rights, democracy has developed in Cambodia over the past 30 years, and tell us what the state of democracy, human rights, and governance, generally speaking, are in Cambodia today.
On, on the 23rd of October 1991, 18 countries, including Canada, signed an agreement which is called the Paris Peace Accord for Cambodia, which allowed Cambodia and the Cambodian people to come together, to have time to think about reconstructing the country after 2 decades of genocide, the Khmer Rouge genocide that lasted from 75 to 79, but managed to kill over 2 million Cambodians, including my parents. And there were conflict among, it was like a civil war. From 23rd October 1991, with that peace agreement, that is now the foundation for the Constitution of Cambodia, which allowed for the first time in the history of Cambodia to have a election that was sponsored by the UN, an election that over 95, maybe 98% of the people of Cambodia were able to participate freely without the fear of being labeled or being arrested although over 200 people were killed before the elections. That election in 1993, which we call the UNTAC election, gave, since to then until the recent election in 2017, gave the Cambodian people the sense of what it is to have the taste of the fundamental values of human rights, the right to live as a citizen without fear of being arrested, the freedom of expression. Civil society were able to grow. There was an independent media. There were workers' unions, independent workers' unions. But that all, and which allowed us from the opposition party to gain more votes at every election, the local election and national election. We gained in 2013, the last parliamentary elections, we gathered over 45% of the votes, which meant over half of the country, more than half of the country. And that following election at the local level in 2017, we made over 5,000 seats at the council level, commune council level. Incredible. How did we do that as opposition to gain so much, to extend our base so widely in the country? Because we took advantage of the Paris Peace Accord, of the principle of we fought for what was enshrined in the Paris Peace Accord and in our Constitution, the freedom of expression, the freedom of association, the freedom, especially to get engaged in politics. And for women, it is very significant. We were able to get about 20% of women elected at the parliamentary level and at the local level. As opposition, we stood up, or we continue to stand up and to represent our people on the issue of land grabs is enormous, is very widespread, and the government that has been led by Mr. Hun Sen, whether he forced himself into grabbing all the seats, which is the current situation, or not, he put mega development, huge scale development above local development, which meant that the poor, which meant that the farmers who represent 80% of the population of Cambodia saw their land being grabbed, saw their land, sometimes the whole community, especially indigenous communities, turned into Chinese, right now the Chinese military base. Saw their land, the whole half, the coastal coast of Cambodia, in the southern part of Cambodia, is now at stake, because, and the coast is a coast that is, in terms of geopolitics, is very key because of the access to South China Sea. So at this moment, without the opposition, I am in exile. My leaders inside in the country are facing in jail or in the house arrest, or cannot leave the country. I cannot go back to my country. All my papers have been revoked. I travel without any papers if I consider myself as Cambodian, but luckily I am an American citizen. So I am able to travel around to advocate for human rights and democracy for Cambodia. And at this moment, we are very desperate. That's why I came to Canada, because Canada is one of the signatories and of the Paris Peace Accord. And specifically, we're asking Canada to comply with the obligations as a signatory. When you sign a peace treaty, you don't walk away. You don't just monitor from afar. You have to be part of you have to be a guarantor. When liberties, fundamental freedom, when human rights are violated to a point where the whole country, the integrity, the sovereignty of a country is at stake, but also not just the sovereignty and the integrity of Cambodia is at stake, but of the whole region of ASEAN, the whole region of Southeast Asia is at stake. It becomes not just a regional regional security, but a global security, because we are dealing with the power of China, not just e-commerce, not just commerce of China, but the military of China that could affect the whole region. So we are asking the government of Canada to work with other signatories that have implicated themselves in ensuring free and fair elections and ensuring freedom of expression, freedom of the media, freedom of civil society, to come back together and to give to Hun Sen, the government, the regime of Phnom Penh, of Cambodia, a very strong message. The next election, which is supposed to come in about 6 months from now, should be an election, must be free and fair elections. Because, and then the signatories of the Paris Peace Accord must use that document, which is a historic document, which is, to us, if it comes to freedom and human rights for Canada, it must be a document that can justify the full intervention, intervention of the signatories, including Canada, especially on the issue of human rights, especially on the issue of of democracy. We asked Canada, how can Canada and the people of Canada as well be involved? Be involved by putting human rights and democracy, especially human rights, into any form of assistance to countries that Canada gets involved in, especially into trade. And by using a law that Canada has, few countries do have that, which is the Magnitsky law, which means that this law can allow the government of Canada to impose individual sanctions. We are proposing a list of about 12 high-ranking officials of the regime of Mr. Hun Sen, which includes military officers, which includes business tycoons, to be on the blacklist for sanctions, meaning the freezing of their assets, meaning once it is they are on the blacklist and Canada is willing to use the Magnitsky law, that also prevents Canadian businesses to get involved with Cambodian businesses who are on that blacklist. On this blacklist, we are putting the name of a Cambodian Canadian who is the CEO of the Overseas Cambodian Investment Corporation, OCIC. Mr. Pung Kia Sai, he is Cambodian with the Canadian citizenship from Montreal. His company is totally connected, protected by the family of Hun Sen, and we have evidence that there is Chinese investment, because these mega projects cost over, for example, the construction of the new international airport for Cambodia is that concession is given to there was no bid. The concession was given to this OCIC. There is no way OCIC we can have $2 billion without the help of China. And we want transparency. We want, if he is a Cambodian Canadian, we want Canada to also look into this case very seriously, because the huge mass of land that is needed for the construction of the satellite cities, the construction of the international airport, sits on the land of innocent farmers. Now these farmers are either forced to accept to move, are forced to move, are evicted, are given very small amount of money that is worth totally less than 1% of the value of the land to this company. Recently, over 30 landowners were put in jail, were arrested, put in jail, finally released, but under the surveillance of the court. And either you take that, or you stay in jail, or you give the land to this company. So it is totally an abuse of the power of this company, with the protection of under the name of development, so the protection of Mr. Hun Sen. This company in that another development project totally is able to fill in the Mekong River, which is the source of water for the whole of Cambodia. It's a river that is the life of the people of Cambodia. So he's filling in this lake, the lake around, the river, you name it. that company can do anything they want. And there is also, through investigation from independent media, we found out that part of the land is also given to the children of Mr. Hun Sen. It is to a point where Cambodia belongs to one family, one man, one family. So when it comes to that point, I think Canada or any signatory must not just watch from afar. That's why the Paris Peace Accord is a tool, is a tool, is a document that can be used, but collectively, but not just one country at a time. In order to, if you want to work and you want to make change, we are confronting with a dictatorship. The democratic forces need to be united.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I'd like to focus in a bit on, as you were speaking about Hun Sen, describing his family's role in the country as controlling a lot of power, the whole of the country being held in the hands of one family. Obviously, your relationship to Hun Sen has been contentious for a very long time, but originally you were in government in the late 90s. So I guess could you describe first your decision to leave government in 2004, and also speak a bit about how Hun Sen and dictatorship in Cambodia has changed over that period?
I went back to Cambodia after 18 years away. During the Khmer Rouge regime, during the genocide, I couldn't go back home. Then afterwards, when the country, with the Paris Peace Accord, the country opened up, the process for peace was starting, and I was able to go back home after 18 years. I got involved very quickly in civil society movement, in the movement for the women's movement of Cambodia, with the peace movement in Cambodia. Then I got more and more involved during the fourth conference on women in Beijing. Then when I came back, I was asked by the Prime Minister to be his advisor on women's affairs. And then I ran and enjoyed the party, the Royalist Party, and I won a seat as a member of parliament. And then I gave up the seat to accept a position in the cabinet as Minister of Women and Veterans Affairs from 1998 to 2004. During that time, it was a time of really the honeymoon time for freedom, for liberty, for civil society to really practice and to implement what is enshrined in the Constitution of Cambodia, as well as what is enshrined, stipulated in the Paris Peace Accord, which is human rights, democracy, free and fair elections, and so on. So with that scope of freedom that we were able to enjoy as a Minister for Women's Affairs, and I was the first woman to hold that post because previously it was held by a man, although it's a Women's Affairs ministry. I quickly made it very clear about the principle of gender equality, and that women's rights are human rights, which is a phrase that was used by the First Lady of the United States, Hillary Clinton, at the time. So I transported from China, from Beijing, this phrase, women's rights are human rights. And with that as the principle for the ministry, we were able to to expose the concept of gender equality. Even the word gender does not exist in the Cambodian word. It's not a Cambodian word at all. But it allowed us, because it's not a word that we are familiar with, it's not in our vocabulary, although we are forced to use the word gender or gender in Cambodian. That allowed us a chance, gave us a chance to explain the concept of gender. Right, what is, if you are a woman, what's the difference between reproductive health and economic, what's the difference between reproductive rights and productive rights, right? If you are a woman, you are supposed to raise your children, you're supposed to be a good mother, you're a good wife, which all of these roles for women, the functions of women enshrined in the Cambodian Women's Code, the Chapap 3. And the Ministry of Women's Affairs was the first one to say, we respect the code, but the code is not up to the Constitution. Because even in the Constitution, it says that work at home deserve equal pay as work outside of the home. Therefore, the role of a woman at home as a mother equals the work, the role, and the work, the value of a woman outside, bringing money out. Therefore, what the woman, a wife, a mother, produces inside the house, the household, must be valued the same way. And so that concept becomes a base for us to promote women into politics, local politics. It is a concept and the argument for women to say to their husbands, to say to the families, that we want a better education, we want promotion in our job, we want childcare, we want protection from violence against women, domestic violence. Then we talked about domestic violence. We gathered a lot of testimonies, a lot of stories about violence against women, and which involves sex trafficking, human trafficking, which involves the work, underground work of women who work in the karaoke parlors, and then the domestic violence, which women were afraid to talk about. And as Minister for Women's Affairs, I put that as one of the top priorities. Yeah, and at that time, it was the spread of HIV/AIDS. It was really like HIV. It's like COVID-19 now. The whole world was put upside down because of HIV/AIDS. But we were able. We took advantage of that moment of the spread of HIV/AIDS to expose the concept of reproductive health, the protection from, and women can say no, even to their own husbands, and the concept, the use of contraceptives, which was real taboo. And with a strong campaign, a national campaign to educate women about sexuality, young women, about reproductive health, it gave us for the women's ministry a really powerful position, because we take it not as the fight for liberty, not as a fight for women's rights alone, but it is a fight to preserve the family, to protect the family, to give protection of the children, protection especially of young girls inside the family, And in the domestic violence law, there is a special article that redefines the word family. Because during the war, after the war, people came back together and lived under the same roof, which meant that the young women, female domestic workers, were totally without protection. We had so many cases of rape by the owner, by the head of the family. And they consider themselves, the young women, the domestic workers who work for the family, as members of the family. So with that as evidence of widespread cases of rape within the home, we define the family as anyone living under the same roof. You don't have to have blood association. And that was a revolution. But at the same time, the society was able to see, yes, it is to defend the value of the family. That was the argument that I had. And so when we went to negotiate to have the law adopted, it was again a campaign to educate.
So I guess moving through that period, what happened for you to leave the party or leave government in 2004 and join the Center Party?
Although it gave me a chance to campaign for women's rights, and then I fundamentally believe in women's rights as human rights. So I defended that concept, that the right, in the full sense of the word. So I went very openly. I went against corruption. I went against any form of abuse, and knowing that but I was limited. I knew that at some point they would break me. And that meant that I knew if I stayed with this government or with the party that is weak, I would be expelled. I would be arrested. Then on the 22nd January 2004, a huge event happened, which was the murder of a very well-known trade union leader, Chia Vichia. He started the first movement for workers to stand up, to demand minimum wage, to demand respect, to demand freedom, to demand safe working conditions. It was a huge struggle that was also led by the current president of my party, Mr. Samrangsi, who was the finance minister with the same party that I belonged to, but he was expelled by the party because, like me, or I, like him, we were very determined to have a clean government, clean from corruption, clean from nepotism, free from any form of development that put at stake the natural resources of the country. Like he was very much against deforestation. So as Minister of Finance, the country, he knew that the country lost a lot of its revenue because of the widespread deforestation, and it continues still until today. So on the 22nd January 2004, I quit my party to join the opposition party and stayed with the opposition party and ran for a seat in parliament in three times and won 3 times. That's why it is that's why I continue with the the Cambodian National Rescue Party, the opposition party, to fight together with parliamentarians, with leaders at the local level, national level, who share the same concerns, the same values, the same principles of for democracy, for human rights, for dignity of our people. And the fight continues until today, which explains the dissolution of the party, which explains the fact that I am in exile. And I am sentenced to 20 years in prison for incitement. I cannot return to Cambodia. I want fair trial, like the rest of us. You know, we want fair trial. We want to return. We are not able to. We went to apply for a visa, as many of us hold dual citizenship. Like Mr. Rangsi is a French citizen. We have other members who are Canadian citizen or Australian citizen, but we cannot return home because we are with the opposition. And we will fight. We will continue to fight. And these personal cases, these individual cases, we bring to the signatories of the Paris Peace Accord as well. We also want to be able to return to face the court. We demand fair trial. At the last case, the first case, we were judged in absentia. There's a new case similar to that. We want to again go back to Cambodia and defend ourselves in court.
I think that's something that has been, I think, really interesting throughout your time as a politician and activist. I think back to 2009, where you sued Hun Sen. Again, it's turning to the courts, not to find retribution, but to point to the depth of corruption and the possibilities for change. So now moving into Exile since 2017, what has that been like for you and for your fellow CNRP members? What does organizing look like in Exile, and how has that differed from organizing whilst in country?
Although our values, our defense for liberal values, for human rights, for democracy, for rule of law, for social justice remain the same, but our strategies need to be modified because we no longer have a presence inside Cambodia. We no longer can go to every village in Cambodia. We no longer can speak to our people face to face. And I miss that a lot. I really miss that a lot. Now I see myself rolling my suitcase from airport to airport. That is the hardest part of the fight from exile. And I want to stop that. I want to be able to go inside Cambodia even if I have to be arrested. At least I can be on Cambodian soil. Anyway, the strategy from outside, like last night, when I come to Canada or I go to Australia or I go to France or I go to anywhere, I go and speak with the members of our party. The Cambodian National Rescue Party has a very strong base in Canada because we share the same values for democracy and for human rights. Yesterday, Cambodians in Canada represent a really small number of Asians. And we came to Canada after the genocide, and Canada has been very, very generous. Have continued to welcome refugees, political prisoners who are able to escape. We are very grateful to Canada for that. However, I keep saying to our people, now many of us now are citizens of Canada. So last night at the meeting, after we had a good Cambodian meal, which is a tradition, right? I say, okay, let's spend the next 45 minutes. Because we have been here since 1980, at least early 1980s. We know so little about politics in Canada. When I ask them how many people have voted at the last election just recently, they all raise their hands. But I say, okay, once now that you have voted, do you know how many members of parliament are in the House of Commons? Yeah. Some say 200, maybe 400, 100. No, look it up. 338. How many parties? 4 maybe? 5? Finally one look it up. And they say Google. 6. Okay. But just one independent. That one independent seat is a seat that has the same value as other seats. Yeah. So understand the value of your vote. Understand that those that you voted for, no matter who you voted for, it doesn't matter. Once they are in the House of Commons, they serve the people. It depends on the circumscription of course, of the ridings, right? In this country we call riding. But at the same time, as a community of Cambodian Canadians, do we have a voice? They say, what voice? Well, that's it. That's it. If we want to, now we are asking the Canadian government to pay attention to Cambodia, to the human rights in Cambodia. How are you going to make sure that Prime Minister Trudeau will comply with the obligations that are enshrined in the Paris Peace Accord? Well, we spoke to the Global Affairs yesterday, and I said, is that enough? Of course not. We have spoken with the government of Canada for a long, long time, you know. It is the abuse, the violations of human rights is not happening just today in Cambodia. It's been going on for a long time. So we talked about the efficiency, the necessity to be an active citizen, and to use your vote for change. No matter who you vote for, there is an obligation in the democratic system from the elected representatives to the voters till the end of the mandate and even beyond. And you don't want to you have to stay involved the entire time. And that's how Canada, the Canadian citizens are able to preserve their principles of liberty and freedom. It just doesn't happen alone because there is a good government. It has to be with the participation, active participation, the awareness of the citizens as voters.
I think of another quote that I saw from you, which I thought was really great. They say, "Take my votes, give me rice." We say, "Keep your rice, we'll give you rights," which I think really captures democracy and democratic values really perfectly. I wonder, what do connections look with civil society in Cambodia for the CNRP?
Civil society in Cambodia today functions with a lot, as with the opposition, we are not even inside. They are inside, and I totally admire the challenges that they take, that the risk that they take. Like today, there was a sentencing of environmentalists who happen to be very young, because Cambodian youth are also involved in the protection of justice on the environment. They have been sentenced again and again for up to 7 years, and some two members of parliament from three members of parliament. Even though we are in exile, we are no longer there. Again, they were sentenced to extra more years in jail. And the Cambodian Center for Human Rights issue a very strong statement. They follow what's going on with each case. We are really, this is the last resort that we have in terms of civil society, voice from civil society. Yeah. And they know that they can be arrested. Some of them have been arrested, but they return to work. That alone is a significant movement that should be kept with a lot of protection. And it is this type of protection, this type of commitment and deserve not just the attention of the signatories of the Paris Peace Accord, but the courage of each leader who consider themselves as Democrat or liberal or promote social justice, promote democratic principles. You have to bring together all that your country has as a tool, either your law or the universal human rights, to defend those who put their lives at risk in a country that is in a regime that is so oppressive and in dictatorship. Because human rights are universal values, and democracy must be a global issue. It's not for anyone to define it. There are rules, there are laws, there are principles that are universal. No matter where you are, you have to defend that and defend together as a global community.
I think we're kind of approaching time here. I'd like to turn now to speak a little bit about repression as we're moving towards it, and space for freedom of speech and potentially hopes for the future. How would you characterize repression under Hun Sen? Both, I suppose, in the past, but especially preceding 2017, the crackdown on CNLP.
Since the COVID-19, Hun Sen has become even more oppressive. There is a law called the COVID-19 law that can put you in prison for up to 10 years for defying the order of the government. Defying the order means even if you if you refuse to be vaccinated, that is going against the government. That could go as far as trying to topple the government through your act of defiance. That's the meaning of the law. That law is for that. That allows also for the Prime Minister to declare state of emergency. Thank God he has not declared state of emergency. During COVID-19, about 20 or 30 people are still in jail now, or are being re-educated. The word re-education reminds us of the Khmer Rouge, where if people don't follow the rules of the Khmer Rouge, if you wear glasses or you look like an intellectual, you look like you have some form of education, you must be re-educated. That could also mean you must be killed. Now, re-education means you are put in a cell for as long as you remain silent. I work very closely with the people who are inside the cells right now, members of our party, because we raise money, and thanks to the diasporas, Cambodian diasporas, we are able to raise money to support the families who are outside, but also those who are inside the cells, because inside the cells there's no water, there's no soap, they are exposed to COVID-19, the spread of COVID-19. They don't eat enough. There is a teenager who is autistic, who is now in jail with his father, and his mother and the other wives formed themselves into a group that called themselves the Friday Women of Cambodia. Every Friday, the women come to either an embassy or to the court to protest, to demand the release of all political prisoners. It breaks my heart to hear the story of those who are inside, who we are from the same party, so we know each other very well. And our party is a strong party because we campaign together. We are really grassroots. And so we know the stories, we know the relationship, we have very strong ties. It's a big family to us. It breaks my heart to know that our members who remain in the cell, they are in the cells, in the prison cells, because they refuse to defect to the ruling party. Consider that commitment, consider that determination, consider that dignity. So I also have a organization called Courage Fund Cambodia, which is to raise awareness about the political prisoners, the prisoners of conscience in Cambodia, to raise funds to pay for their legal representation in court, to pay for the education of their children, because when the family is separated, then the children can no longer go to school. They drop out of school because there's no money, or the parents or one of the parents is busy trying to deal with the court case, or trying to every week come to bring food, bring water, bring soap, bring medicine to the parent who is inside the prison. That means that the education of the children is disrupted. So Courage Fund Cambodia, with very small funds, we are able to support all these prisoners up to now, and some of the education of some of the children.
What brings you hope moving forward? How do you believe that the values of the CNRP, these liberal values of democracy and human rights, can come to fruition in Cambodia today? How does that happen? What role will you play?
My parents were among those in the mass graves in the killing fields of Cambodia in between 1975 and 1979. I was 20, a student in America. When I found out during all that time, I was looking for my parents. When finally Cambodia opened up, there was a genocide that was totally kept covered, that was not covered by the media, because no one was allowed to go inside Cambodia. When the news came out, we discovered mass graves, the killing fields, refugees running around, hunger, famine, corpses. Then when the news came out through the New York Times or the media, I realized very clearly that the meaning of freedom, the meaning of human rights, the meaning of a life that is a life that you that's not, it's not about eating right, it's not about a good education alone, it's not about a good shelter alone, it's about the freedom of expression, it's about the freedom of thoughts and the choice you can make for your life, whether to choose your representative, whether to choose to have 2 children, no children whatsoever, even to have an abortion. It is your life. And that life cannot, that you want, is not a life that is passive. It's a process, it's a struggle, it is not a journey that you go alone just for yourself. It's a journey that you go with others and you continue on that path by creating more and more and more space. That's what gives me the strength to continue on that path for liberty and for freedom, for the choice that I want to make for my life. And now, on a bigger scale, the choice that our people need to make in order to see a better Cambodia, a Cambodia that has a spirit, that has a soul, not a Cambodia that is destroyed either naturally or destroyed because the spirit is gone. You cannot wait until the spirit, the national spirit, is gone, because that will be the end. There is a moral obligation. Excuse me. There is a moral obligation to wake up every morning and to say the journey is way ahead. The steps must be taken. And as a leader, that step is taken with the same values, which is to defend the freedom. And I can't see myself or others be deprived of that sense of freedom.
To finish, I'd like to ask, as we're a student publication at McGill, if you could say something to students at McGill. What can we do to be involved? What should we be doing? And more broadly, how should you hope that the international community, as you've been talking about, engages with Cambodia?
I would say to the students in McGill that you are very fortunate. When I enter, this is my first time at McGill, although of course I know it's well known as a university. At this moment when I cannot return to my country, when I enter your campus, you enter McGill, the gate, I cross the gate of McGill, I feel that sense of freedom. I see the students in the libraries. I see the student coming with in the backpack. That sense of security. That's the knowledge that you can acquire because it is free. It is your right. Imagine that for students, for youth of your age, for all over the world. How many of those youths cannot even imagine holding a book, let alone sit in a library doing research and protected by law, both and have enough funding to support quality education. I think it is important not to take all this for granted. It is important not to only think about Canada when you fight for quality of education, when you fight for excellence in any field, when you fight to live in freedom. I think freedom is a global, a common denominator, a global wish for all, to especially young people, to have a future that you can be in control of. And that is through your studies, of course, but also through your active engagement in politics.
Thank you very much, Mu Sochua.
Thank you.